Hopefully today's hour will not be overwhelming. In fact, I hope it'll be offering you a really good reprieve to overwhelm. I really do want to acknowledge, though, that for those of you, and it's quite a large number of people that have registered, more than 1,000, I think, you've taken an hour out of your day, whether you're tuning in now or a little bit later, and I know how precious your time is and how much competition there is for your time. So I really appreciate it, and I worked really hard to put together something here that will be meaningful for you. And at the end of the time that we're together, even if you take away 1 or 2 nuggets, and put them into action, I hope the payoff will be big for you. That, despite the crazy busy times we're working and living in, you'll be able to use them to help you think better, to perform better, to feel better, and live and work better. So I'm all up for that, and I'll take 2 orders of that on my end, please. So just a little bit. I won't go too much into detail about who I am, because I think that's all available in the materials that were sent, and by all means at my website, which we have all the details at the end slide. But just very quickly, I am a certified coach. I have a company called Big Cheese Coaching. I also have 20-something years of professional communications experience and worked in the area of public relations. I write for the Globe and Mail on career, but also work-life issues as it relates to well-being. I'm a huge proponent of personal and professional well-being, and in fact my very first career many moons ago was in fitness. And today, as I work with people on their experiencing personal, professional, even organizational well-being, I really take a holistic interest, and it's not just the physical, it's the mental, it's the emotional. And when it comes to overwhelm, we're really going to get into that. That's a potential derailer to well-being. And I want to share, before we go any further, that I have a very intimate relationship with overwhelm. And rest assured, some of you may say, well, I don't know that I want to admit the same, because it sounds pretty nasty. But, many people who are very accomplished, and I consider myself in that bunch, certainly are experiencing increasingly those moments of overwhelm, because we are doing so much and the pace is really ramped up. So it was really throughout my entire, my career in various stages where I found myself with those moments or those periods, because I do take on a lot. And for some of you out there, some of it is imposed, work is really busy, but some of it could be even discretionary, the things that you choose to do. And in fact, in my book, there's even a little chapter, which we're not going to get into that chapter in great detail today, but I do want to point it out. It's managing the paradox of choice in the buffet of life. There really is a lot to do, and we want to do. So for some of us, our overwhelm might be because what we choose to do. Now, I wrote a book because increasingly, not only do I experience it, and the ideas that I present draw from some learning I've done over the years that come from the worlds of neuroscience, some really easy neuroscience, but really important stuff, positive psychology, and emotional intelligence. I feel that there's a lot that we can do that's actually easy things we can do if only we just commit to it. And increasingly, I'd be doing some work with people who are very accomplished. We'd be getting ready. Perhaps it was a coaching call or a coaching session, and that person, we were supposed to talk about something related to their leadership or their career or a project they're working on or what have you. And they'd show up to the meeting and they'd be kind of stuck, and they describe that they've been stuck for a little while. So this business of overwhelm does creep in, and so I decided to write a book. And it's a toolkit, and I'm going to be drawing on parts of it in our talk today, and hopefully give you a taste of some strategies that can help you in your own particular situation. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to offer some brain-friendly ways to get the most out of our time together. So, 1, don't multitask. Please take this hour, if you can, if it's within your power, if you don't have absolute must-have, interruptions from others, focus. Not only will you get more from the content, but just the time in focusing, it's going to be a beautiful thing for your body, mind, and soul. And one of the things we're going to talk about a little bit later is what focus does for us. It'll be like a little vacation. So it's not a yoga class, it's not meditation, but you know, just taking an hour to tune in and park all the other stuff is actually going to be energizing for you. Whereas if you do multitask and you think, oh, I'm going to kind of have to tune in, it's an easy webinar, and I'm going to check my emails and do a little work, it will be depleting. Okay, and we'll hear a little bit more about that as we go on. Do set the intention to find your nuggets. And even if you have 1 or 2 nuggets that you take away and you make them meaningful to you from this seminar, that will be worth your while if you create some action around them. But before you do the action part, make sure you write down those nuggets and write down the commitment, because we're going to talk about the value of writing things down, getting it out of your head but keeping it top of mind. When you leave this webinar, you're going to be pulled into the busyness of your life, and there's going to be so much other stuff competing for your attention. So write it down. And then finally, do make something actionable out of that nugget. It doesn't have to be big, it could be tiny. And one of the things I'm a huge fan of, excuse the paradox of huge and tiny all in the same question, all in the same phrase rather, but you can have big payoffs with tiny goals and tiny actions. So here's what we're going to do in our time together. I do want to talk a little bit about this business of overwhelm and just sort of set the stage as to what it really is and what it's about. Likewise, what this business around ease is, so that we make sure we're on the same page, and that also what's really important is that you recognize when overwhelm hits, because sometimes it's that mindfulness of, if we're not really tuned in, we sometimes get lost in the impact of overwhelm, and then we're not in the best state of mind to actually do something that could actually shift the course. And when we are able to notice when it hits us, we are able to take out one of our easy tools and make a big difference. I am going to talk a little bit about neuroscience, not in a big complicated way, just a little bit of a primer, because that's actually the killer app of our times. It's going to make the easy ideas that I'm going to speak of have more rigor and more meaning for you. I am going to introduce 4 brain-friendly strategies to live and work with more ease. Now, the book that I have, Ease, it's actually a toolkit. There's 17 and then some, even more, but 17 core ideas. But I've chosen 4 thematically to give you a good taste and give you enough to get started, but by all means dip in for more if you're interested. And as Marina said, we will leave time at the end for some Q&As and see where you're at with the Q&As. And we can always continue the conversation. I think you'll see towards the end of the webinar, I'll make sure that my Facebook page, the Big Cheese Coaching page, if you have other questions that didn't get answers, we'll make sure we can continue the conversation. So, common question when you bump into somebody or you talk to somebody you haven't talked to in a little while: how are you? How's work? How's life? And, you know, if we were doing a poll now, which we won't, I think I can intuitively guess what is so common that, you know, all too often we might say it's good, but it's crazy busy. And I know that keeps coming out of my mouth. And I don't do it because I wrote the book. You know, the subtitle is Manage Overwhelm and Crazy Busy. It just pops out of my mouth. And I bet the same for many of you. Now, if a picture could say 1,000 words, I bet a lot of you from time to time feel that your work, your life looks like this. I don't mean that your office necessarily looks like that, and perhaps not quite so literally, but do you ever feel that there's just so much coming at you? Sometimes it just feels like a big mess, and it's pretty chaotic. So this is something that I know I sure do at times when everything's coming at me at once. Now, another moment, you know, we used to be able to step away from work, and that was the end of work. We had very clear, hard boundaries. And now we bring our technology with us, which can and is very helpful in some ways, but it also adds to the overload because we're always on. And inboxes, well, some of the times they just seem so big, so insurmountable, that could be a bogging down experience too. It just feels like that mountain is so high. How do we ever get to the top, or how do we get through it all? Now, folks, in the not-for-profit sector, you guys do such good work, and you're committed to such big, lofty goals and in service of so many important causes. And it means a lot to you. That's why most of you opted to go that route. Increasingly, though, with times, sometimes leaner times and resources tight, it does become a burden, and it's a heavy lift. And sometimes you could feel, gosh, it's a big load that you're carrying. So, visually sometimes these ideas sort of say a whole lot more than, any words that we can put to these pictures. And of course, you make them mean what they should for your own situation. Indeed, we are living in times of absolute crazy busy. There's always too much to do. The inboxes are never done. There's rarely enough time to get to all that we want to, or to put as much time and effort as we want to do in order to do, as good a job as we'd like. There's deadlines. They're hard and they're faster. And then that's just, the stuff that happens during the day at work. Then you go home, and there's so much stuff that happens there too. So whatever demographic you're in, whether you have young children or perhaps aging parents, maybe even though the participants today predominantly work in the not-for-profit sector, many of you do double duty, and I know many of my clients who have full-time jobs in the not-for-profit sector, but they're also volunteering their time in other not-for-profit endeavors. So volunteer life, personal life, the demands, and even the things that you want to do. Heck, wouldn't it be nice to get to the gym a bunch of times in the week? So let's just slow down for just a second, and I almost want to take a collective sigh. We're in this hour together, and I'm ramping up, and I'm kind of feeding into this overwhelm, and I almost feel everybody's pulse quicken. So I almost just want to exhale. I just almost want to pause. And we are going to turn the corner, folks. We are going to find our way to a more comfortable place. Before we do that, I just want to make sure that we all know that we're in good company. Because if you feel alone sometimes and you don't want to admit that you're feeling overwhelmed, please know that you are not alone. It's an equal opportunity player. So look to your right, either literally, some of you are with colleagues physically in a room listening in, or virtually if you work virtually. Look to your right, look to your left, look up and look down. Folks, we all, everybody experiences, whether it's now and again or on a more sustained basis, we feel increasingly overwhelm is hitting everybody. There have been studies upon studies, and there's articles upon articles. It is part of the new paradigm of work and life. And where we used to have, periods that were ebb and flow, busy seasons, more quiet seasons, it seems like the new normal is busy all year round. Now, I know that there have been people that I've talked to who come to me and they have challenges, either with people at work. It could be a direct report, or it could be a boss, or it could be a colleague. And one of the things that they may not be thinking, we hear the story, or the person is, gruff, or in some way unpleasant, or not supporting them and giving them the attention that they need to help them grow, and all kinds of things. And the one piece that they may not be thinking, I try to get clients to think from a place of empathy so that they can at least understand what's going on for that person, is it's a very good chance that that individual might be experiencing overwhelm themselves, and it could in fact be your own boss. So just because that person is above you and has a more senior role, they may be experiencing overwhelm. And when overwhelm hits, it unfortunately does not enable the best of ourselves to come to our work and life. And so it's a lesser version of yourself. And so know that about others that you interact with, that might be playing out for them too. So as we go through some of the strategies later and some of the understanding, maybe and hopefully it will also broaden your perspective of what might be going on for other people that you might be working with or even living with. And there might be even things that you can do to lean in to help out a little bit. So take a second and just kick back a thought, like, what does overwhelm look and feel like to you? And I'm going to invite you to think in terms of like a phrase or a word. And if we work together in a room, a physical room, we'd have shout-outs. So I'm going to ask you just to think those thoughts, and I'm going to I have to confess I'm a little bit of a mind reader. No, I'm kidding, of course. But I've done this kind of presentation many, many times, and I'm familiar now with the kind of responses that come to the fore. So chances are I'm going to be shouting out some of the words and ideas that are present for you in your mind. When you think about overwhelm, what does it feel like? What does it look like? So some of the words and descriptions that usually come to the fore when we get into this conversation is stuck, heavy brain, tired, can't think, flat, maybe even cranky, traffic jam in your head, brain freeze, low mojo, bad mood, not sure which way to turn, you know, just loss of your thinking ability. And so that's sometimes frazzle. So those are just a few, and I'm sure there's many, many more descriptions. But I don't know about you, but that's not fun, nor when you're in that state are you going to be able to do your best work and live your best life. Okay, now let's turn the corner. What does ease mean for you? Oh, that lovely word ease. So I'm thinking and I'm kind of visualizing and I'm trying to connect into what you're all thinking, what the bubbles are when you think of ease, when you think of your work life. Well, some of you may have thought something along these lines. I know I've had conversations with people, and they said, I just want to leave. I just want to sit on a beach for 6 weeks, or I want to sit in a hammock. And I'll tell you, that's important to have our breaks. It's important to have our vacations, there's no question. And in fact, Canadians are quite challenged when it comes to taking vacations. We're taking work on our vacations. We're foregoing vacations. So that's really important that you do take your time outs. But that's not quite what I meant when it comes to ease. So what I'm thinking is it's more to do with, like, I'll actually echo a conversation I had with a client who came to me. She was completely overwhelmed, and in fact she was trying to make a change and find her way in a not-for-profit sector. She was working in the corporate private sector, but she had just was completely overwhelmed and in her particular situation, and she just excelled and said, I want to work hard. I have big goals. I have lots to contribute. I'm passionate about helping others, and you know, if there was a particular capacity, she wanted to do that. But I just want some ease. I want to get rid of the static. I want to get rid of all this unnecessary excess. You know, this business of overwhelmed. I just want to work with more ease. And that's, my friends, what it's about. We want to do great work. You all chose your careers because you want to contribute. You want to have professional success. You want to enjoy your life. So let's get rid of that static that comes, the stuff that we can, and live with the freedom to do great work and to bring the best of ourselves. Some of you might be saying, okay, let's get to it. Like, what's the magic bullet? Like, that's what I want. But what the heck is it? And so there is no magic bullet. There is no one tool. I'm going to talk in the plural. It's tools. And mastery is knowing which tool in the moment to use to help you navigate the crazy loads of work and life so that you manage your stress at an optimum level. You maintain your energy, because energy is really important for you to be at your best. The pace is fast, the loads are heavy, it's easy to wear down and deplete. You want to make sure that whatever you're doing, the right strategies, how you're navigating, is you really are working with your brain and allowing yourself to bring forward your best thinking capacity. And then there's that mood thing, because we're going to talk about that. Because when you're overworked and when you're overwhelmed and you allow that mood thing to go, you know, tank a little bit, that's actually going to compromise the whole deal. So if you're waiting for work to slow down, that's like the holy grail solution. It may not come in our time or in our, it might for some, but far too often what we're seeing is we keep waiting for the slow period, and what happens is we find ourselves still racing. So the mastery is knowing how to navigate differently these crazy loads. And again, we're going to talk about some of those ideas. It's not the complete list, but we want you to know that you can if you use the right tool at the right time. So what I want to assure you is these tools are easy. They're so easy, it's almost embarrassing. And some of the tools that I brought to talk about today from in our talk are going to be things you already know. But it's going to be like, oh yeah, it's just that I don't do that regularly enough, or I used to do that and I just fell off the wagon. Some of them are going to be that kind of thing. Then there's going to be others that I'm going to just introduce a peek up to, but there's really much more, you know, we can peel the layers to much deeper levels. But it is important to know that they are easy, but what is important is making the commitment to reach in and pull out that tool in the right moment to relieve yourself of that overload moment in the moment. I can't stress that enough. This is not a permanent state and a one-time fix. It's a moment-by-moment transition. So here's the killer app, is starting to understand a little bit more what your brain needs and your mind, how they work together. Because those easy tools at face value, like I said, they don't seem like such a big deal. But when we start to apply a little neurosavvy to them, they're going to make sense, but a lot more sense than if you just look at them at face value. Having a little bit of neuroscience savvy gives you the power to understand yourself. It's like your operating system, which gives you more empowerment to better manage yourself and choose behaviors to work with your brain, not against it. And what I'll tell you is that far too many of ourselves, myself included, our habits and our non-habits, we work against our brain. So it's not just the busy loads that are imposed on us, it's how we navigate. That if we can make small tweaks, we're going to make a difference. So now let's introduce you to two central brain characters. Of course, I'm simplifying the brain a great deal, but for purposes of our talk. So there's two parts here, the higher thinking brain and the survival brain. So most of us have at some point taken a stress management course, and you've probably heard of the survival brain, which is the amygdala. That's the brain that's built to protect us. And if you take your hand, folks, and put it on the back of your neck as part of the limbic system, that's kind of where that part of the brain resides, and it's way back in evolutionary days when we were hunting and gathering and we had to really be attuned to the lions and tigers and bears. Now we know, and you've all heard, that that the amygdala is fast and it emits cortisol and all kinds of chemicals to make us fight or flee from danger. And that when we have that going on too much with the stresses of the day, it has health implications. Many of us have heard about this in stress management courses, that it's actually really unhealthy to live with too much stress too long. But what we haven't really talked a lot about until more recently, the last few years, we're starting to talk about another part of the brain, and that's the higher thinking brain. And if you all take your hands now and touch your forehead, that's where the prefrontal cortex is. And that higher thinking brain is where a lot of the stuff happens that you need for your work in life. The discerning, the decision making, the thinking, the reflecting, the problem solving. Now, I'm about to change slides. Take a good look at this slide. It's the only time you're going to see these two guys hanging out together. Because what you need to know is that when the survival brain is firing, the prefrontal cortex, the higher thinking brain, usually goes offline. And just when we need it most, it's not really working because the survival brain is so fast, it takes over. But conversely, if we can find strategies to get our higher thinking brain working and even just firing it up a little bit, it also will diminish the survival brain. I'm being very simplistic, folks, on this little description, but it's really important to hold those concepts because the little tricks that we're going to do are all about making sure we're working with the right brain at the right time. So your PFC, your higher thinking brain, again, you need that, folks, to navigate the crazy loads, to figure out how to prioritize, to course correct, to navigate difficult conversations, to think through how best to approach situations. In order for this brain to work best, there's conditions. It needs moderate stress, quality sleep, and positive mood. It also needs a sense of calm and to feel that it's somewhat in control, a sense of order. It loves to focus, and it likes to think. So, moderate stress, folks, it needs some stress, not no stress. And if any of you have ever been in a boring job that didn't stress you enough, you'll know that your thinking brain kind of went to sleep. So you need a sweet spot of stress. but too much stress in times of crazy busy tends to be more the norm. The stress brain is fast, loves a good threat, but an imaginary one will do just fine. And so something that triggers the stress brain, well, we may not be confronted with a lot of real lions in our day-to-day work, but we are confronted with perceived lions, like crazy deadlines, immense pressure, tough conversations, pressure at home. When we worry about our loads, or even self-talk, like things like, oh my goodness, how will I get this done? Oh my gosh, this is too much. That triggers the fast brain. That triggers, those are perceived lions, and then the stress brain takes over, and guess what happens? Your thinking brain is not working optimally, so you gear down and you can spiral down. So we don't want that. We want something very different. So here's a quick poll, folks. I'd like you to think about what challenges you during your crazy busy times of today's work life. You can only choose one, so what is the biggest challenge for you? 1, managing stress. 2, getting quality sleep. 3, managing your mood. Or 4, all of the above. Let's see, and then Marina's going to tell us what this looks like.
Wonderful. So we've got everybody voting here. Just go ahead and click the item, the one on your screen that makes the most sense to you. And I'm just going to leave that open for just a moment longer. Great. So it looks like we've got most people voted. So I'm just going to share the results with everyone. It looks like we have managing stress at 21%, getting quality sleep at 20%, managing your mood at 20%, so all similar there, and 39% for all of the above.
Oh, wow, this is great. Marina, thank you so much. Folks, this is really important. So what science and research says is that, first of all, any one of these 3 areas, the too much stress, the lack of sleep, and the mood piece, they impact each other. So, you know, if you're stressed, you may not sleep well. If you're cranky or you're not sleeping well, your mood certainly will be impacted. They're interrelated. But here's what the science says. When you're experiencing all of the above all at once, which is what the biggest percentage was, and then the other 3 were pretty equal, you can experience what we call, has been coined by a couple neuroscientists, Jessica Payne, oh, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the other one offhand, but they have presented something called leadership lockdown syndrome. And you don't have to be in a formal leadership role to experience that. What that basically means is bye-bye thinking capacity. That's when you get that overwhelm. Your thinking capacity just goes to tank. Just tanks, rather. And just when you really need it, easy things become difficult. Do you ever have that when you're overwhelmed? Something so easy feels huge. So notice how all of them really are integral and they're part. We're all experiencing them. And given the statistics, again, proof that we're not alone. You're all in this together. So anything you can do in any one of those areas, whether it's managing your stress or getting better sleep or managing your mood, will hopefully have an impact in all the areas and improve things for you. So these are the kinds of things that I do go through in more detail in the book. But for today, let's just dive into a few of the strategies that any one of these strategies might have an impact on your stress, your sleep, and your mood. And we want to take great care in all those 3 areas because they all will impact your ability to feel good but perform great and think well. So organize and work with the brain and mind is going to be the very first strategy I want to talk about. So folks, I'm a big proponent of getting things out of your head but keeping it top of mind. We have so many tasks on any given day, not just in our work life, but the stuff you got to do at home. Don't forget to pick up Fluffy's, veterinarian food. Buy apples for the cake that you promised you'd make for your friend's birthday, what have you. But of course at work, write the report, call the client back, get the proposal in, do a performance review with, your employee. There's just so much happening. And even though some of it is real easy, I cannot tell you how many times I have met with clients, and I'm talking about leaders and really high-performing people who've come to the meeting and they've either didn't follow through on things or they feel frozen. And I always check. I say, tell me about your systems. What do you mean systems? Well, how do you keep track of the stuff you have to do? You have big loads. And invariably, I always find out the more overwhelmed they are, they've either stopped with whatever their systems were to keep track of their to-dos in terms of some physical manifestation, some written out thing, and they've fallen off the wagon. And it's always directly related. No system, huge overwhelm. A little bit of a system, getting a little less overwhelmed. A lot of a system, much, much less overwhelmed. So, you know, some people put down to-do lists. And that's because if you do a to-do list as just a kitchen sink list, it can be overwhelming in itself. But to do a to-do list right means you're prioritizing, and it's not necessarily a list, it could be different lists. Folks, I'm really big on the neuroscience of why we need to write things down. And my best practice is, I don't prescribe that you do what I do, but what I do prescribe is that you find something that works for you. And so I just happen to be a big proponent of, you know, writing down priorities. I have my daily priorities, I have my weekly priorities, and I have my monthly. Because otherwise it will get stuck in my head and I will get triggered by those yikes attacks. I need to have it close by so I can see it and I can say, oh, that's okay. It's on my list. I know I will get to it. But if I don't have it written down, I'll either forget about it or I'll have that anxiety of knowing I know I have a furball of stuff to do. And then, of course, there's learning to say no. I love this little cartoon from a friend of mine, Kathy Thorne. She's got that last column of, who am I kidding, I'll never do this. So, you know, practicing and knowing, you know, how to right-size your lists, of course, is an art in itself. But the neuroscience of to-do lists is that, in fact, our brains are not built. Your prefrontal cortex, touch your forehead, that part of your brain is not built to be a storage bin of to remember all your tasks. Your prefrontal cortex is built to process good thinking tasks. But when we jam it up and try to remember, we're wasting its capacity. And what could happen is that you become mindful, F-U-L-L. And let me be a little outrageous. I didn't write it on the slide, but we might even find ourselves being mindful, F-O-O-L, because we're not using our brain in the way it's meant to be used. If we could get it out of our head but keep it top of mind, we could be more mindful and present in those moments we really need to. So you might be in a meeting, and rather than thinking, oh my goodness, I got 12,000 other things I got to do today, and then missing something important that was said, you could tune in because you know the minute you finish that meeting, things are in their rightful place. So there's a lot more that I can say about this because it's actually what I call almost banal, and it's the lowest hanging fruit, and yet it is so important. And I always debate if I should include this in my talks, but I keep getting reinforced to do so because I keep meeting people, and again, they're not doing their list or they're not writing things down. So if you choose to write it down, and some of you like technology, just make sure that it's always easily accessible. So I love my little smartphone or my computer because no matter what, I'll be in the car, I'll be parked a little early for a meeting, and I'll look at my list and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I have to remember and then I look at my list, I go, oh, it's there, that's okay. And I have an immediate calm. Now, a reminder, again, the neuroscience of all this is that your prefrontal cortex, your higher thinking brain, really likes that feeling that you've got it under control. You don't have to literally be in total control, but you have to feel that you have your arms around it. So even if you took 5 minutes and spend some time to organize your thoughts, refresh your to-do list, prioritize, make a plan, you will feel better. And when I say make a plan, I don't necessarily mean a big, huge, giant, complicated plan. It might just be, okay, this came in, I'm going to schedule some time tomorrow, and you schedule it to deal with that tomorrow. That could be a plan. And that immediate sense of calm is not just an intellectual and mental calm that comes with having a nice to-do list or having your tasks kind of ordered. there's a physiological response. You get a natural spritz of GABA, which is a calming hormone. It's like antacid for the brain, and it promotes more good thinking because remember, your prefrontal cortex likes that feeling of calm to do good thinking. So literally, as you go forward into your days and into your weeks, catch yourself in that moment of anxiety. Pause, park, reflect. Take a few minutes to organize thoughts, refresh a list. I often do my daily list several times a day just to sort of give myself like a refresh. And notice what happens, that feeling of calm. And you'll be able to think and do better. So kick the tires, make it actionable, and even if you choose a 1% improvement, you can have a powerful result. With more energy, maybe you'll sleep better, better productivity. My next tip is focus time. And I know some of you are saying, what? I have no time in the day. What do you mean focus time? I'm too busy. Well, we need to understand what happens when we try to multitask. Our brains, again, the prefrontal cortex, is not built for multitasking. In fact, what you do when you're shifting and shifting from one activity to the next, you're toggling. And your brain could walk and talk because the walking, if it's not somewhere complex where you really need to concentrate, is from a different part of your brain. But to do some two cognitive activities at once, you're really toggling back and forth. And your brains weigh only about 2% of the average person's body weight, but consumes 20% of energy. That toggling back and forth consumes more energy than it needs, and it's exhausting. So if you ever find yourself at 3 o'clock just fried, you're going to be more tired on those shifty days. And so research has shown that multitasking compromises productivity even though you think you're being productive, but it also compromises your energy. So to make that idea work, to make that meaningful for you, you need to pay attention and notice the gratuitous multitasking. There's no question that there are some days that we just are going to be shifty. You're going to get calls that you have to answer. You're going to have different meetings you have to attend to. You're going to have different tasks. I get that. I live in the real world too. But the gratuitous multitasking is pay attention to yourself in the next couple days or the next week. Notice yourself when you're checking the email in the middle of an activity. You're thinking about something, you're writing something, the email tings. You go check it out and it asks you to think about and do something else. And you respond right away and it may not be urgent. That might be gratuitous where you could actually park that and not have checked the email. By the way, folks, I'm guilty of that, and I'm paying attention to that on my end as well. And there's all kinds of distractions that you might be in the middle of work remembering, oh, I was supposed to call so-and-so, or oh, I need to pay my Visa bill, or oh, reminding yourself of something. And rather than parking it and writing it down and getting it to later, you interrupt yourself. So just notice the gratuitous stuff that you can be responsible for. And see if you can build in focus time, even 20 minutes at a time. And one of the things that I find often in my coaching calls is often people feel there's no time to get my work done. I'm going from meeting to meeting to meeting. And I ask them if they ever schedule themselves into their own schedule to get work done and to think. And often they don't. But the minute they think about that and they do it, they have that immediate calm. So if you can build in some focus time at a time when you think you might need it, like for instance the afternoon, when you've had a full shifty day, to maybe think about that report you have to write or think through a problem you need to solve. That can be one way to do it. Another strategy is if you had a very shifty day and it was juggling and you couldn't help it, and like I said, we all have days. See if you can do something after work to refuel. And you can right-size whatever that is according to what your life allows for. So, like for people who have the freedom to go to the gym or what have you, I know there are days when the last thing I feel like doing is going to the gym. I'm so exhausted. But it is the best thing I can do to do either Pilates or yoga because it's very focused and it does not just good for you physically, but mentally it's a fueling activity because you're focusing. It's a brain kind of thing. It's similar to meditation in some ways. Even meditating, folks, 5 minutes at a time could have powerful, powerful impact. But if you are somebody who goes home and then you got a whole bunch more of stuff to do and people to attend to, you need to be creative how you find that time for yourself. So I had a client, a gentleman, who had a very busy family life, and he had a crazy busy day at work, always, and then he'd go home and have more, because he wanted to have dinner with his family, and there was all kinds of stuff to do with the kids, and then there was more work later on at night. So one of the things that we came up with is before he'd enter the house, he was going to sit in his car for at least 15-20 minutes, just quietly, and he was going to journal, because journaling was a wonderful way to sort of tune in and journal, and there were specific ways of journaling, which we won't get into now, and he would get into a very mindful kind of focusy kind of time, and that was like giving him like a refuel up for the next part of his day. So you do need to be intentional and then sometimes a little creative, but what is important is that you build in some focus time in your day. So this is another big juicy strategy, and it's not a one-trick wonder. There's a whole section in my book about empowering your thinking. Folks, a lot of the times those perceived tigers, those lions and tigers and bears, have to do with how we're thinking and perceiving. So our self-talk, like, oh my goodness, I'll never be able to do this project, or, you know, procrastinating because it feels so big. So there's a lot of strategies you can do to become more mindful and develop more conscious and empowering mindsets, because often the mindsets that we default to disempower ourselves. And so in the book I talk about the kinds of self-empowering questions you can get in the habit of asking yourself. I talk about chunking down your tasks using the metaphor of the mountain. You know, we all know this, it's not new, but yet so many of us, including myself, forget. We have a big project and we're looking at the end goal and we feel overwhelmed by it. And when really all we need to do is just pick somewhere to start and chunk it down. There's a whole story that I tell of a friend of mine who's brilliant and successful, but was overwhelmed, absolutely overwhelmed by the task of creating the celebration for her son's bar mitzvah. And because she was thinking about the whole gangly thing. And all I said is, what's the first thing you need to do? And she says, oh, I need to book a room. I said, well, any ideas? She goes, yeah, I have a couple ideas. I said, well, what do you need to do? She said, well, I need to make calls. And I said, oh, well, when can you make the calls? She said, tomorrow morning. I said, are you willing to do that? She says, yes. I said, how do you feel? And she sighed. She says, oh, my God, it was that easy. And it's so embarrassingly simple. But because when we're in the grips of overwhelm, we're just not thinking. And so these little tools are little examples of how to empower your thinking. And again, embarrassing, isn't it? But we forget. But here's one that I love. It's my favorite tool. It's asking the right question. When we feel that there's so much going on, we default to that scarcity mindset of I can't, too much, not enough time, and it closes us down. Instead, if we could just pause and park and say, okay, what can I do now? It sounds so silly and embarrassing, but it is so powerful. Because what this does is it's kind of like chunking down and taking that first step, but it's even bigger. Because what it does is it opens up your mind to possibility, shifts you to an abundant state, and you would be surprised how even one small thing that you can do opens up a vault of possibility and puts you into action momentum, and where you thought you couldn't, you work more fluidly and easily. And so that's just a little taste, and I encourage you, for those of you that want to grab that ease and read that, it's like, by the way, these tools and chapters are like a page and a half. They're easy reads. And but it's that simple. What can I do now? And try it out. It gets you out of Stucksville and puts you into a better place. It's so silly, but it's my favorite, one of my favorite tools. Okay, I'm going to go through the last one. And I'm whipping through these because I wanted to give you a taste of at least 4 ideas, but there's really so much meat to each of these areas that I'm only really giving you a taste. But hopefully as you step away and you think about these, you will have make them your own and build on them. This last one really deserves to be, I mean, as they all do, but this one in particular deserves to be its own course. And in fact, it's something that I am actually offering as a course on how to get seriously positive. Because this is not just a fluffy, nice to do. We actually know from science that positivity is a make or break. You remember we talked a little earlier about that mood thing. Positivity is a make or break for your success and your ability to handle overwhelm. Let's just take another quick poll. When you're in times of crazy stressful, crazy busy, what of these three choices characterizes you? Choice number one. Marina's here. Yeah, choice number one. You're somewhat moody and cranky. You feel bogged down. 2, neutral, not impacted, doesn't bother you. Or 3, you feel fairly happy. There's always something to feel happy about.
And Eileen, my apologies. I don't have that poll set up for you. I'm so sorry.
No. You know what? That's okay. It's absolutely no problem, Marina. You know what? Because I'm noticing the time anyways, I'm happy to just speak to it if that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay?
That's
perfect. No worries at all. Yeah. So, but tune in, folks. What happens? Do you feel bogged down when you're overwhelmed? Do you stay neutral, or do you stay or are you fairly happy? Well, the thing to keep in mind, excuse the pun, but negativity, if you do spiral down and get that cranky or sad feeling with overwhelm, it will limit your brain ability to make things worse. So it spirals you down. It's really actually a risk factor. Conversely, positivity spirals you up. But this is just not metaphorically. Studies, I've taken these courses with the guru of positive emotions, Barbara Fredrickson, and she's walked us through study upon study upon study that even a micro moment of positivity, whether it's a happy thought or sharing a laugh or having some fun or just doing something that makes you feel good, can expand what you can see, literally with your eyes, like your eyesight, what you can see. It expands what you think of, what you can achieve, and how you feel physically. There's a spiraling up effect. And it's absolutely, when I do my in-person workshops, we play with this and we do little tricks to kind of prove it and test it out. But you can do this on your own. Next time you have to think through something, anything, you have to be in a kind of creative, resourceful place. Do something that makes you feel positive before and see what that does. That's way more powerful than just even being neutral. Okay, so even if you're not cranky, positive is better than neutral. So, the message is not that you need to be a Stepford permanently happy person, because that would not be human. But the message is that you need to pay attention to getting enough nutrients of positivity in your day, just like we have to do with fruits and vegetables. We need a certain amount in our day to get the benefits of good nutrition, and we need a variety. Well, the same thing with positivity. You need lots. Ad hoc won't do because the negativity is very powerful and strong. You need a minimum of 3 positives to every 1 negative of a micro moment. And ideally, that's just getting by. You really want to ramp it up to at least 5. And so some people say, well, that's an interesting concept and that's an interesting ratio, but how do I do that when I'm so busy and I bog down? And, there's a tendency to want to save it all up for your weekend or save it up for nighttime or save it up for the vacation. But you really need to find ways to consume your positive emotions throughout the day, just like you wouldn't save up your vegetables for Sunday night and just eat a whack of broccoli. Well, it's the same thing for positivity, and you need to be intentional and mindful. And once you do set that intention, you can find them everywhere. You don't have to travel. You can stay and just journal happy thoughts or positive thoughts. Now, I'm going through this so fast, folks, and there's so much more here, but I just want to give you a quick little picture. Look at this list. It's vast. Being grateful, moments of joy, serenity, engaging in something that interests you, finding ways to be hopeful, being proud, laughing, amusement, getting inspired. And number 10 is the biggest one of them all. That's positivity resonance. That's experiencing a moment of positivity with another. Now, folks, those of you that work with others, what a built-in amazing opportunity. And you can do this at home with those that, those of you that have families and friends. Share a moment with another, and you will compound. You will get, a very healthy dose of your positivity. So many ways to make it actionable. Count your blessings. Incorporate a positivity experience in your daily meetings. Show appreciation and give thanks to others. Celebrate the wins, large and small, and instill pride in the work that you do every day. And notice others in your workplace that might be struggling, and think of ways to have perhaps coach them and offer them ways to navigate overwhelm. And whether it's injecting a little positivity or helping them organize and think through so that they can work with their brain, not against it. Teach people to try to tame the multitasking beast and focus. Practice more empowered thinking. And bring it all home and bring it to yourself and bring it to work. I wish I could keep you for another hour. I wish I could keep you for another few hours, because there's so much in each of these 4 tools, and of course there's so many more that we didn't even touch on. But there is a way to stay in touch. In fact, this is quite a busy slide. I hope I didn't overwhelm you with this. But by all means, chat away on Twitter. I'd love to hear your nuggets and continue the conversation. For those of you on Facebook, look me up, Big Cheese Coaching on Facebook. And, you know, share your nuggets, share your questions. We'll continue the conversation. For those of you that enjoy, you can sign up for my not-so-monthly newsletter. I won't bombard you, but you can hear about, you can get new articles and hear about other webinars and other programs. I am also interested in doing a positivity course, and if you hop on my website, you'll see a little more about that. And of course, for those of you that, I don't make any money on my book, so this is not a sales job. I don't make any money on the book. It's really in service of helping people live, and flourish and deal with overwhelm. So if you feel like, diving into that a little more deeply, you can find out more about ease at easerx.com. So I want to thank you very much for tuning in. And I did say to Marina that I would stay a little beyond the hour to answer questions, because they're probably going to be more than we can handle all in the hour. But I'll hand it over to Marina and see what we have. Thank you, everybody.
That's great. Thank you so much, Eileen. What a fantastic presentation today. And I have to say, a few people have commented how calming you are, Eileen.
Oh!
Yes. So, I think we can all take a nice deep breath out of our day, right now, and say, this was a very calming experience.
Oh.
That's great. So we do have some questions. First of all, can you just expand a little bit on the prioritize and triage point that was listed in strategy number 1?
Thank you. Absolutely. So in my book, one of my messages is that prioritizing is not a tool or a skill. It's a repertoire. And you need to constantly be negotiating your priorities. You might have your priorities laid out for the day, and guess what happens? Things come in. So you need to constantly be in that question, what's the priority now? And so sometimes we need to roll over a task that we intended to do today to another day. But don't just let it go. Roll it over so that you don't lose sight of it, and so it's on the next day's priorities. And triaging is being ruthless with your priorities, because when it's really busy, we have to really discern what we have to say no, or no, not now. And so it's a much more rigorous sense of prioritizing. In the book, I lay out all kinds of ways to prioritize, what's important, what's urgent. What happens is when we don't have good systems is that everything suddenly becomes urgent. So for instance, like I mentioned a little earlier, I have all these tools related to, habits. I'm constantly taking a look at my monthly priorities, my weekly priorities, and my daily priorities, and I'm constantly refreshing those lists, because it keeps me present to, if there's a monthly priority, I can't wait until it's due the next day, because that will put me into a yikes attack mode and shut my brain down. I need to know, so I might pull out a little piece of that, and I might put it in the weekly or the daily. Like, so for instance, even doing this webinar, I started to think it through, well beyond, the deadlines for when I had to hand in, the PowerPoint and all this and that. So you need to constantly, and if suddenly your day turns topsy-turvy because unexpected things come in, simply asking the question, what's the priority right now, is using your prefrontal cortex and is a good thinking ability, as opposed to, yikes, oh my goodness, which will bring in the amygdala and shut you down. So prioritizing is a repertoire of tools, but you need to live in that question. It's not just doing my priorities for the week and then, oh my goodness, that went out the window, and being upset about it. Just live in the question, make it fluid, make it flexible, and leave wiggle room to adapt.
That's great. And on that same topic, we have somebody who's asked if you could comment on how to determine when it's time to plan or prioritize versus when it's time to ask the what can I do now and accomplish even a small task.
You know what? It's an art to know when is the right tool for you at any given time. I'll just speak personally. I do refresh my daily lists. Like, you know, this afternoon I might look at the list and say, okay, there's a couple hours left or a few hours left, and this is what I'm going to do, because it calms me down, and so that activity just makes me feel better. But other times it might be around a big gangly project, okay? So maybe it's writing a report or a project or whatever. We all have big projects, right? And, you know, many of us procrastinate because it feels so big and gangly, okay? So, oh, I have 2 hours left in the afternoon. I was supposed to work on project X. And gosh, you're going to feel that resistance, and you're going to suddenly find yourself procrastinating. Maybe suddenly you feel it's really imperative to check out the Facebook comment, you know, or you'll find ways to distract yourself because you're going to feel resistance. So tune in and notice if you feel resistance, it might be you're looking at that project as a big giant mountain or a furball, you know, of tasks. That would be a great time to say, you know, I'm not going to tackle the whole thing. It feels gangly, but what can I do? So very often what I'll do is I'll just do, maybe if it's a big project, I'll tease out a little tiny chunk, and I'll say, I'm going to do some thought starters. Or I'm going to do a really, really rough, horrible, terrible draft. I write for the Globe and Mail, and sometimes I'll have something due, and I don't feel like, for whatever reason, I can't get to the article or something. It feels big because I'm tired and overwhelmed. And I'll just say, you know, I'm not going to write the article because that just feels too big. And I still have time, like, because I never leave things to the last minute because of that. I get too touched by those yikes attacks. So I'll right-size that, and I'll say, what can I do? Well, what I can do is I'm going to brainstorm sort of the points that I want to make. Or I'm going to just write the intro. And somehow, by right-sizing and making it tiny, all of a sudden, the ideas start to flow. My brain's been opened. I don't feel threatened. I don't feel the resistance, and I end up getting a lot more than I even thought I would. Because what you're basically doing is you're working with your brain. You're calming down that gangly kind of threat alert of too much to do. It feels too much, and you're accessing the prefrontal cortex, which is creative and resourceful.
Fantastic. And we have a really great question I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. Any tips for a work environment where you're always being interrupted? Multitasking is not so much of an option because you're always being spoken to or asked questions.
Yes, it's a great question. I love these questions. So I did a workshop with a group. It was their quarterly meeting, and we did a workshop based on the bookies. And that issue came up. And one of the things that we were doing with the group is that we were creating code words. They wanted to come up with special buzzwords as a group, as a team, a company they would use to support each other on some of these ideas. And when they needed focused time, a lot of people worked in cubicles. And so they came up with like a buzzword, I don't know why, I can't remember. I think it was tune in and tune in time. And they would put a little sign on their cubicle, and it would say tune in time. And if somebody would show up at their cubicle, they knew that this person was tuning in, and if that, unless it was urgent, they were asked to respect that. Now clearly if it's urgent, that's fine, but most things aren't. Because as a company together, you're managing expectations. So you don't have to do this company-wide, you could do it with your own small team. And just start to have conversations around these concepts to support each other. Because, and even if you have team meetings, far too often we make it all about the project, which of course you need to talk about the project, I'm not putting that down, but you need to also have conversations about how do we want to be together and how do we want to work together to make sure as a team and individually we do our best work. And you can co-create those kinds of agreements. The other quick thing is I had a coaching call yesterday with a leader, very busy leader, talks to he manages like 25 people, and also in the not-for-profit world, and he tries to be accessible and have an open door policy. But what's happened is that he never ends up having any time for himself to think and get the work done that he needs to do. And I said, where maybe you need to think about a balance, and of course manage expectations, so communicate with people what that means when your doors close. And make sure that you're scheduling some time in for yourself where you are tuning in, because you won't be good to anybody if you give away all your time. But it is about setting those boundaries and somehow whether you carve it in the schedule or if you need it in the moment and you close your door or whatever, or you put a little sign, but communicate those to others so it's not misinterpreted. Create agreement as to what that means. And this is all about culture. And I love doing work about workplace culture, and I just love the work around this stuff that we've talked about, ease, but also the positivity. There's so much you can do to make sure that it's not just you, but that you build it into the culture and a sense of understanding and how you be and work together, and you support each other, and you have language that conveys that, and it can be very powerful.
And on that same note, Eileen, what about when you're dealing with superiors? So if you have a board or an ED that's quite demanding of you, how can you find ways to incorporate this with them?
Well, first of all, I think the webinar link is going to be available, so invite them to tune in if they weren't tuning in now. I think, again, depending on the dynamic and the relationship, communication and agreement, and sometimes we need to manage up. And there is an artfulness of how you do assert and make requests. And so sometimes as I'm working with clients and they want to bring these kinds of ideas to the fore, sort of how you frame a request or suggestion is going to have a lot to do with the impact of it. But it is tough when you do have a superior that's not sort of plugged into these ideas. So you do need to somehow get buy-in. And so, you know, if that is a goal, then you do need to think that through. What's the best way to share these ideas? And as I mentioned, even just Charity Village, like, so generous to make this available, not just to people tuning in live now, but later on. And you can share this link in this webinar with others who you think it might be helpful, and perhaps a little note saying, wow, if there's aspects that you're going to take on and try out for yourself, you can share that and say, here's some ideas that would be helping us, function, and maybe we can even have a conversation about that as a group and team and support each other. It's how you frame it. But again, I have to be careful how I'm prescribing that because everybody's situation will be different, so I want to be respectful. But make the commitment, think it through, get help if you need on figuring out how to frame it, but take a stand, and that's good that you want to do that. I love these questions, Marina. These are just awesome. I'm good for more if there are more. I don't mind staying.
That's great. We've got quite a few more, so we'll just see if we can get through a handful more. Another common one: getting good quality sleep. Do you have any suggestions for people who are finding themselves really, mindful at that time of trying to wind down and get a good sleep?
You betcha. So I struggle sometimes too. So sleep is increasingly becoming a huge issue for so many people, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. So let me first just say, for those that are lucky enough that aren't having sleep issues because of any hormonal or physiological or issues, it might just be as simple as setting the intention and making some sleep hygiene commitments. And what I mean by that is, making sure that room is dark, because darkness stimulates the melatonin that helps us sleep. Tool number 17 in my book is all about sleep, and I draw from the wisdom of an orthomolecular nutritionist who's done a lot of studies on. It sounds really fancy, but her tips are so simple and easy. In fact, one of them is having milk and cookies before bed, or milk and some carbs if you're diabetic and you can't have too much cookies, because not a whole row of cookies or a whole box, but a modest amount, because the carb, the sweetness, the milk brings some protein and tryptophan in our brain, which helps stimulate something called serotonin, which helps stimulate sleep. But if you just drank the milk, it wouldn't break the blood barrier, the blood-brain barrier. So you need a little carb to help break it. And so a little milk and cookies is not just something that our grandparents, told us about. It's actually got some science to it. So who might argue with milk and cookies or, a little snack? But so there's some easy things you can do. Don't, read the computer, have a computer or devices, just before bed. Set the intention to try to get 7 to 9 hours. That's the easy side of it. For some other people, you might need some assistance. What a lot of people don't realize, if you're on medication, a lot of very common and popular medications, whether it be blood pressure or anything, there's so many medications that people are on these days, they actually deplete you of things like magnesium that is really important for sleep, and other things. And so the right nutritionist or homeopathic might be able to help you customize. But I would start with the basics, and there are, as I said in the book, a whole bunch of things. Pay attention to the darkness in the room. Do set the intention. But the other thing that I will say, let me just add one more piece, is that the other tools, they say exercise, people who exercise sleep much better than people that don't. So cardio, some cardio exercise, that's one. But even getting organized, I do not go to bed, I do not leave my day without my to-do list for the next day. Because otherwise my to-do list wakes me up at 3 in the morning. Can you imagine that little to-do list with little legs, you know, tapping you on the shoulder? But it does do that. And if you've written it out and you know, these are my priorities for tomorrow morning, there's a sense of completeness with your day. And so you don't just want to have that big long weekly list or monthly list. You want to know, what am I doing tomorrow? And when you wake up tomorrow and things change, you'll deal with that because you've learned how to prioritize in the moment. But do not go to sleep without that list written out. And even the weekly list and the monthly. There's then this sense of calm that you've got your arms around your priorities. Maybe schedule things in. I'm going to work on that project. Schedule it in. You have a sense of a plan. All that contributes to calm and less chance of those to-do lists jumping out, walking over, tapping you, and singing, you know, waking you up in the middle of the night. Those are a few ideas, Marina.
Wonderful. I think we've all had that experience of the to-do list waking us up at 3 a.m. I know I have. We're just going to finish up maybe with 2 quick questions about tools. So first of all, we had someone asking about journaling. Do you have any favorite tools for that you can recommend for prompts, writing prompts, or other resources that might be helpful?
Absolutely. I actually have a whole little chapter in Ease that gives you writing prompts. Some talks about journaling. There's a whole chapter on journaling. I think there's different kinds of journals that I talk about in that chapter. So there's the BMW journal that some people think. First of all, let me tell you what journaling's not. It's not a Dear Diary, here's what's happened today and every single day. You don't have to write every day, but I will say the more frequently you write and the more purposefully and focused you write, oh my goodness, it is such a beautiful thing, the payoffs and the impacts that you can get. But a BMW journal, I bet none of you have heard of that. The BMW stands for, I hope this is okay that I'm saying it on a webinar, but bitch, moan, and whine. So sometimes we need to. Sometimes we need to vent and get it out of our head. But too much of that feeds into the negativity. So what you want to do is, I love the question, whoever asked that question, good for you, by asking about prompts. So asking yourself an empowered question and journaling about it allows you to use that prefrontal cortex in a beautiful way that's even more so than just thinking it on the fly. And the whole book is filled with questions like that. So it could be ramping up your positive. I journal every single day. I get my clients. It could be a 2-minute journal. That could be 3 good things that happened today. And you literally, that's a prompt. And very often we write more than 3 because we're thinking about it. And you can do that on your smartphone. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Or it could be, what do I want to acknowledge myself for today? We're so busy beating ourselves up for not doing enough, or maybe we work in an environment that is a little thankless, and so you need to acknowledge yourself. And another prompt could be the ta-da list. We talked a lot about to-do lists, and we know that to-do lists never end. I love to do an occasional or sometimes daily to-do list, and literally on a blank sheet what I got done. And it doesn't have to be just the big stuff, it could be the little things. Oh my goodness, you will get such a wonderful feeling. But then it could be something bigger too, like you're working out a problem, and you might ask yourself questions like, well, what are some possibilities? And you could just write that out without being committed. Or if those of you who have done exploration about your strengths and values and you want to have some more career mojo and you want to work and live in congruence with, you know, your best self, I sometimes invite clients to say, how did I honor my values today? How do I want to honor my values this week? There's no shortage of questions, and I go through a ton of them in my book. And then the one that I showed you guys earlier is, well, this feels huge. What can I do now? And or let's say one last one. See, it's hard to stop. I'll make one last one. Let's say you're kind of puzzled by something. You just keep asking yourself open questions like, well, what do I want? Because very often we don't stop and slow down to ask us that. What can I do? What can I be responsible for? And slowing down and asking yourself some open kind of learner questions, you'd be surprised how quickly insights will come. So anyways, I hope I gave you a whole bunch of ideas, but there's more in the book to help you out.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're just going to wrap up with one more question, if that's okay with you, Eileen.
Fine.
We had quite a few questions come in about other tools that you might recommend, whether it's online or just hard copy tools to do with to-do lists or prioritizing. Do you use Evernote? Are there other tools? Things like that. So if you could maybe just leave us with some suggestions that you maybe find helpful or have been helpful for your clients.
Absolutely. The first thing I do want to say is it's rarely one tool that's going to you might need tools. So for instance, there are some people that I know that really like certain technology tools like Evernote, which is online and you can use it, you know, and see it whichever computer you're on. There's other people that I know really just like to handwrite things in a little notebook, and it's absolutely okay. And then there are people like me who uses a combination. So I might do, you know, my Apple iCloud notes because I love writing my to-dos on that because it follows me. I could get it on the computer, I could see it on my smartphone, I could see it on the iPad. What I like about that is the portability. But I use a hybrid. I also scribble out my daily tasks in addition to that, just so that I see them on paper, I scratch them off. It's just my little system. So those are, you know, you need to experiment. Another one, a client of mine was suggested Penzu for journaling, and it's an online journaling platform, but I'm not sure about that. I've looked at it, and it's okay for some things, not so much for other things, but you can share your journals, or you can keep them to yourself. There's just so many out there that are coming up every day, so I would experiment, and those are just a few, but I don't think it's so much the technology that's going to do it. I think it's the intention, folks. So experiment, try some stuff on, be willing to try different things, see what works, see what doesn't work. Be willing to have a system that might be tools, not tool. If you're looking for the one silver bullet solution tool, it might not quite do it. Like one guy that I know uses, I think it was, oh, I don't think it's Don't Forget the Milk. I don't remember what it is. He had something that captures his to-dos and tasks, but it didn't meet things. It was more like a daily task, but didn't allow him to prioritize and categorize. And it was just rudimentary. So sometimes you just need to just find, I'm constantly retooling my system, if you will. I hope that's helpful.
I think that's great. I think the important thing you've left us with, like you say, is you really have to find what works for you and experiment with a few different things. So that's great. I think that's given people some places to start. So that's wonderful. I want to thank you, Eileen, so much for today's presentation. Not only did you cover a lot of information, but we really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to hang around for the extended question period. That's just wonderful and very generous of you. So thank you. And before we sign off, I wanted to remind everyone that we are going to follow up with you by email with the webinar recording, the presentation slides, and Eileen has offered up a couple of downloadable tools as well that will help you get started. We're going to include a link to a very short survey in that email, and if you could take 5 minutes to fill it out, it would be super helpful for us in refining our webinar content and the delivery as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and I would like to wish you a wonderful and easy rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.